a brief summary of what I'll be talking about this evening, so you can get an idea of the main areas that I'll talk about. Just if you're not aware, hopefully you are all by now, the red area is what is covered by the scheme. So the dark area is the whole of Nottingham City Council area, and the red area is the extent of the selective licensing scheme. It covers about 50% of the geography of the city, but about 90% of the private rented properties. Just to take you back, if you didn't know, 18 months ago the scheme started. It was very big. It is still very big. 75 staff, 12 different roles across the team, from enforcement staff to administrative staff to managers and team leaders and that sort of thing across the piece. Still the biggest scheme outside London that's been approved by government, and it was only 18 months that we got that approved. We estimate up to 32,000 properties covered, but we've based with the turbulence in the market, with comings and goings, with property markets changing, that we anticipate 24,000 applications will be received. It has been a whole new regulatory process. We've done HMO licensing before in a big way in Nottingham, and Aaron will talk to you about that. So we base a lot of our initial work on some of those processes and procedures that we worked on. But as I'll go through this, we'll talk about some of the things that we've done differently since we started. So I'll just go into a performance update. Where are we now? This is just to date, taken a couple of days ago, how many applications we've received in total, where we are on issuing our drafts and our final license that we've issued, and also just some of the property improvements that we've made already. The 199 refers to properties that we went out to inspect, partly because the application process flagged that they might be high risk. Smoke detection, gas fires throughout the whole property, heating the whole property. So we went out, some of them were F-rated properties with on their energy performance certificates. For 70 of those properties, we went out and the landlord had already done the works. They knew we were coming, the new selective licensing was in, gas fires turned off, new central heating had already been put in before we actually walked through the door. So selective licensing alone, and these are figures that we know about, the 70, there are, I suspect, a lot more where landlords have already done things differently and made improvements to their property. 199 is where we have had to intervene. These are just some of the initial figures of where we've been out and inspected some of the properties. This also doesn't take into account the day-to-day work that we've always done is about housing complaints, where tenants complain to us. This is proactive work around selective licensing. This is not the daily business of us improving properties, which we do day in and day out, and we have done for 20 years now, more than that. That is in the hundreds. We improve hundreds of properties every year on top of these ones. In terms of just when we've received the applications, which you might be interested to see, no surprise, at the top left, that was July 2018, about 8,000, nearly 8,000, 7,000 applications received in 1 month. We're still, before Christmas, we were still receiving 300 applications a month. So we're still receiving high volume. Been a bit of a dip in December, which was expected, obviously with Christmas, and that was similar last year. In 2018, December was a quiet month, but it's just interesting to see that we're still receiving volume of applications. To give you an update on draft licenses, and as Councillor Wooding said, we report to her on a regular basis on where we are. The trend, the trajectory, the grey line, is the where we would like to be, where we anticipated if we received and issued everything by May, that's roughly where we'd be. So we're 9,500 as of Monday. I think I pulled the statistics off the system. We are improving. I don't know if you can see a change. The trajectory is increasing. We're issuing about 500 draft licenses a week now. And so 2,000 a month. We should be issuing everything by June as a draft license, which is what I would like to see. And I'd be really pleased as the team works more efficiently. We're more trained. We've got fewer new starters coming through the system. Well, we are still recruiting, got some more new starters starting in February. We're continuing to recruit and keep this moving. Just in terms of our final licenses, which is actually the critical bit, you can start doing your complying with your license conditions when you receive your draft license, but until it's enforced and you receive your final license, in theory you don't have to do anything. However, if you've received your draft, there's no reason why you can't start to comply with any conditions that you're not already complying with. Again, we're seeing an upturn now in some of this. We're rejigging some of our resources within the wider team, and so we're now seeing an increase in our final licenses going out. The sooner we get our drafts out, the sooner we can move all of that resource, those 30, 40 staff that are doing draft licenses, onto final licenses. I anticipate that we will have issued all our final licenses by the early autumn. So that's what I'm anticipating will be shifting. Currently about 19,000 final licenses. If we continue to receive more applications, we'll have to see where that takes us. But the staff are trained, the staff know what they're doing, and we are making some changes to what we're doing as well. Just to give you an idea of what we said we'd be doing, this was at the agreed at the Executive Board report in April 2018. Some of you may have seen this table before. This was just roughly each year what we anticipated we'd be doing on a yearly basis. If I could go back and do things differently, I would. I would promote for all the scheme. We missed out. I think we should have done more promotion, not just up until the date the scheme started, but we did do some, but we did not do enough, and we continue to draw on more resource now to help promote the scheme and do more work to get the message out there about licensing. But there's more that we can still do. But within that, we estimated the first 2 years would be about processing licenses. So I'm not surprised that we are where we are. I'd like to be in somewhere different. I'd like to be in a better place. I'd like to be out there inspecting, dealing with tenants face-to-face, dealing with the landlords and saying, look, how are you doing? How are you getting on? What are you doing differently? How can you improve your property? But we are getting there, and I'm confident that we'll increase our productivity and getting our licenses in force. So you will all know what you're doing. And so when we do come to inspect, you're in a better place to know that you and others are in the same boat. Just to let you know some of our successes, we've heard about some of these already, so I'm not going to labour the point, but we have, if you compare to what we were doing 18 months ago, we have done, I think it's our third large event like this now, if not fourth or fifth. Even Giles said to me, we seem to be doing these too regularly. I was like, no, it's not too regular. We want to engage. We want to make sure that you understand what's happening, can question us on where we could do things differently, and want to get your input on what's happening as well. We're doing a regularly monthly newsletter now, which we weren't doing before. Our website has been reviewed. And also, Aaron will talk about some of the HMO experiences, but we are there to support landlords dealing with ASB in properties. We are there to support landlords dealing with difficult tenants. So if you come across those situations, do email us, selective.licensing@nottinghamcity.gov.uk, or if it's HMO property, hmo@nottinghamcity.gov.uk. Do engage with us. We have got staff that can provide some support and guidance if you haven't got that. I've already touched on the properties that we've improved, so I'm not going to talk about that. The government funding, successful. I think it's actually nearly £100,000, which is great. And again, I've mentioned this at previous meetings, energy performance certificates. The number of grade D and below properties has reduced from 25% down to 15% in the last 18 months because more landlords are making improvements. More landlords are getting their energy performance certificates done that probably should have had them done before. So it's just a real ongoing challenge, and that's only going to get more challenging, as we've already heard. The government's moving to, I think they want EPC level C by 2030. So if you're making improvements to your properties, don't just think, I need to get an E and above. Think D, think C, because actually, the more time you spend now improving your property, the less time you'll have to spend in the future. Just some of the challenges, some lessons learned from the last 18 months. Well, it's been more than 18 months of my life. I know it's not been easy for landlords. I get feedback from landlords, we get complaints, we get comments about what we could do differently. We have done things differently. We are doing things differently than we were 18 months ago. Even before the scheme started, we were doing things differently. But the digital by default has been a challenge for some people. We did some library sessions at the beginning of the scheme. We supported about I think we did 70 different sessions for landlords in different libraries and community centres across Nottingham right at the beginning. We've taken some of our checks and balances at the beginning of the process and put them at the end of the process. So now, for example, we thought HMOs would do what we did with HMO licensing. We don't ask for as much information up front now. We don't need to see all the information that we were asking for 18 months ago. We used to do a land registry check, and we used to reject nearly 50% of all our applications back to you to say, it doesn't match with what's on land registry. Guess what? Land registry is not always correct. We're putting more trust back into the landlords to say, we believe you when you say that this is your mortgage company and it's not this one on the land registry. We'll believe you when you say live at this address and your land registry says a different address. We're trying to make sure that we make those improvements. So our initial processing is quicker. We're continuing to deal with landlords that haven't applied for licenses. We still continue to work with council tax data to identify those landlords that haven't applied and using our information about where we believe the private rented properties are and going back to them to say, you still need to apply, you can't escape as we know where you are. So we estimate we'll be sending out several thousand letters directly to landlords' away addresses, not to their property address, but to the away address that council tax holds. That, and because council tax is updated every year, that information should be reliable and accurate. I won't steal Steve's thunder on the multi-occupancy residential buildings, but that is linked to the joint inspection team that Dave and Councillor Woodings have already mentioned. So that's just a real challenge. But that has led, some of that work has come about because of selective licensing. We've had more capacity to inspect and deal with these properties, partly because of selective licensing. We've had a challenge with a number of requests that we've had from not just landlords, sometimes from tenants, but also from other councils because they've seen what we're doing in Nottingham. So I've been talking to probably at least a dozen different councils that have asked, oh, how did you get licensing set up in Nottingham? What did you do? What would you do differently? So these are some of the things that I'm saying to them as well about what we'd do differently. In terms of our fees, Councillor Woodings has already said we've reviewed our fees. We set up our fees in April 2018, not fully understanding how long we had to work out what we estimated, how long it would take to process a licence, how long it would take to inspect a house. So we've reviewed those and they're going live on the 1st of April. We've also reviewed our block fees. And this has come about because of a review of what the legislation says about what has to be licensed. I won't bore you in too much detail, but if you have a house needs to be licensed. A flat doesn't need to be licensed. A house needs to be licensed. And a house can be made up of lots of flats or dwellings, as the law says. So we have reviewed what we class as a property that needs a license. So there is a block policy that we've developed and was agreed at Council Executive Board in November. There's a policy that says if the property is under common management and control, then the applicant can apply for a block licence. So it's not a licence for each flat, it's a licence for the block. But with that, the policy, you've got to stick with the policy. We won't give it if the property is leased out and all the leaseholders have got different mortgage companies, have all got different levels of control within the property. It's where the property is a block and is managed as a block. It can also include properties that are HMOs within the property, but they would also have to have their separate licence because we can only licence a HMO as an individual property. There are extra conditions that come with that, so you cannot just apply and stick with the current conditions. There are additional conditions that form part of the policy, and all this information is on our website, and the policy sits behind that. Don't ask me what the final dot is, because that is a typo. So that's something that we've spent about 6 months reviewing our policy. That was not a straightforward exercise. And other councils have also adopted a block policy nationally. So we've been supported by some of them, and haven't reinvented the wheel completely. We've looked at what they've done. The fees are different. I don't know if the fees aren't on there. The fees are on our website, but if you have a block of about 8 flats or more, that's when it kicks in and makes it more financially viable. If you're an accredited landlord, I think it's 22 flats or more. So the policy is important, because that's really whether or not you'll fit within that. It might not suit everybody. So if you're thinking about selling leases, or you're a freeholder and you might sell some flats off, it's probably not appropriate for you. But do have a look at our policy. We have emailed all those landlords that have applied for licenses where there's 2 or less managers of the block. So if you've got a block, you should have had an email. And when I say block, we've emailed everybody that's got 8 or more flats in their house. We've talked about the fee review. This is the fee review. Again, the fee used to be, the fee currently is $780 for a non-accredited property and $480 for an accredited property. So the fee increase is really around the accreditation has increased more than the non-accredited fee. And just to touch on some of the developments that are coming up in the next few months, hopefully, as we issue more licenses, the compliance work will kick in more in next financial year. We have done some already, so you may have already had a compliance inspection by a colleague. We're looking to do area-based work, neighbourhood-focused work, working with our colleagues that are already out there in the communities, working with our neighbourhood action teams, working with the local councils. Where are the problem streets? Where are the problem properties? Can we work, not just as our inspecting officers to go and look at a house and inspect the internal part of it, but where are the clusters that are causing problems? What about the gardens? What about the antisocial behaviour? It's not just about property conditions, it's about the overall management of the property, and obviously that affects the wider neighbourhood. So that will be led by our evidence, by our data, ongoing complaints of antisocial behaviour, ongoing housing complaints. Where are they? Are they clustered around certain parts of the city? We've had a number of people ask, I want to know where the properties are that are licensed. So on our website, we have a part of the website that's called My Property. So you can find out who your local councillor is, you can find out the nearest leisure centre, you can find out what day your bin is taken and that sort of thing. We're going to integrate it into that so you can find out already where, if the property that you're looking for is in a licensing area, but we're also going to develop the functionality so you can see whether or not that property has either applied for a licence or has got a licence. And agents have asked for that because they want to check that landlords have actually submitted their application if they're taking on one of their properties. Universities have asked for it, citizen advice have asked for it, and it just makes sense actually to be able to search whether or not a property has got a licence in place or not. The enforcement work is continuing. I'm going to touch on that in the next slide in terms of our ongoing crackdown of those landlords that are not engaging and not applying for licences. Continue to use council tax and other sources of data to root those out and make sure that you, who have applied for a licence, who are complying with the law, get a fair deal on those that aren't. And I'm not going to steal Giles' thunder. He's going to update on some of the national legislative changes, but change is the only constant. As we all know, things don't stand still, particularly in the private rented sector. And just to update you on some of our enforcement activity over the last 18 months, this is just to give you an idea of the scale of what we've done so far. This is ones that have been issued, civil penalties that have been issued at a final. We have to issue a notice of intention first. These are all ones that have gone to final notices, 90 of which relate to selective licensing, and then prosecutions are in addition to that. So over 60 formal enforcement interventions that have gone all the way to either a court hearing or a civil penalty notice, which is where we don't have to go to court. The council can issue the notice themselves up to £30,000, which is usually significantly higher than what we get from the courts, and then the council can use that money itself, gets reinvested into the service. One of the high-profile landlords that you may have seen, Dexter Blackstock. I think we've got the most hits on our social media, on our Facebook pages, when his court case was heard. An ex-Forest footballer who I think it was November, 12 different properties that he'd failed to licence, and he got, I think it's £25,000 fine and costs. I was disappointed by that fine. It was only £1,000 per property, which, yeah, it's fine, but the licence fee was actually more than the fine that he got issued. So I was personally disappointed. If he got £10,000 per property, that would have been £120,000 plus costs. So actually, sounds great, £25,000, it was a fine, but that's we're in the will of the courts when that sort of case goes to court, and I was actually a bit disappointed. Ongoing investigations, 230 investigations that we've been dealing with, and we've issued notices to landlords over 1,400 times to say, to 1,400 different landlords, not the same landlord, to say, what information do you hold about your property? Is it privately rented? How many tenants do you have? And some of those turn out to be HMO properties, some of them turn out to be empty, different landlords, different situations. But when we issue those formal documents and formal notices, we get a response rate of about 45%. So that really is encouraging when we're actually spending more time doing that more complex work.